Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Joe. Good morning.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Joanne. Good morning.
So I'm back again with my friend Lynn Rogers, PhD, MFT, and our friend Tony Lawlor. And we'll talk today about what it's like living with a chronic, or what Lynn calls a life-altering illness, day to day from someone who knows. So Lynn,
Tony, thank
first,
you so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm happy.
Um, as someone who's been working with people with life-altering illnesses, I love the opportunity to talk with someone who's actually living with one and to hear something about when you were first diagnosed. What was that like for you? How did you handle it?
Well, it was a kick, kind of like a kick in the gut. I have been healthy all my life, except for things like a cold or the flu or something. Never was in the hospital. Uh, and then I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And I'd seen my mother go through it. So I had a sense, at least of what her experience was. I've since found out that, as one person I talked to said, well, if you've seen one case of Parkinson's disease, you've seen one case of Parkinson's disease, that it's very individualized and the symptoms express themselves very uniquely in each person. And it was devastating. And my first response was kind of what I'll call low-grade panic of how could I get rid of this thing that cannot be getting rid of. There's no way to get rid of it. And but the instinct was there to try to escape from it. And so that drove me for a couple years. And I tried alternative methods of treatment, which had some positive effect, but that wore off. And then I went through kind of a healing crisis, I'll call it, where my physical impairment was really bad. I could barely get up and take a few steps across the room without needing help, where I would otherwise fall down. And then I started taking the usual medication, which is called Sinemet for Parkinson's. There are other medications that people take, but that's been the standard for many years. And it was kind of like a miracle. It kind of turned everything around, where my mind-body functioning was much better. My motor skills were much improved, to the point that at certain times on the medication, it's just like I don't have Parkinson's disease. And in general, I discovered that even though it's very individualized, there are two major types of Parkinson's disease. One that has a lot of tremors and that type of thing, and the other has to do with motor skills and movement. And I have the latter that has to deal with that. So it was a shock at first, and then I have learned to deal with it.
so will you tell us a little bit more about that? How is it for you now? And what have you learned about living with a chronic illness?
What I've learned is that the best thing I can do is face what is and deal with what is, and not try to not regret what I've lost, but see what I'm doing as a new phase in my life. And so my typical day, when I take the medication, it comes on, and like now it's kind of full strength. And so anybody just meeting me at this moment would not have any idea I had Parkinson's disease. But then in a few hours, the medication tapers off and to what they call off periods. And so my motor skills are impaired, but not to, not where I'm immobilized, but they're weaker and less, and then I take the medication and it comes back on. So I go through this rhythm where I watch my body kind of change during the day. Sometimes during the day, it's just great and fine. At other times during the day, washing dishes or doing regular things is more difficult.
So it sounds like it requires a lot more planning and a lot more attention to how you structure your time and how you spend your energy.
Right. I've learned to structure my day to shape my activity to fit my condition at any given moment. So at those times when it's off periods, that's kind of more downtime when I'll do things where I don't need my motor skills so much.
So this has become like a new normal for you?
Yes, definitely.
How long have you been dealing with this now, Tony?
6 years.
6 years. How have relationships changed for you? Social networks and
It's pretty much the same, but through my association with other people who have Parkinson's, and I do exercise classes specifically for people with Parkinson's and things like that, it's broadened my connections of friends. And so I'm the same person inside this body that I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but just my physical body has changed. So it's pretty much the same, except I have to acknowledge to myself when there are limitations. So in other words, if someone wants to go out for a hike, I can't hike as far as I used to. But to my surprise, I still do pretty well. So it limits my interactions a little bit, but not so much.
Speaking of interactions, we're recording this while most of us are still sheltering in place due to coronavirus. Has that lockdown changed your routine much?
Well, what I found is I have less time where I can distract myself from my physical condition. So I'm feeling it more acutely and the nuances more acutely. So sometimes that's hard because where before I might just get up and go out and do something to obviously do that thing, but part of it sometimes is to distract myself from the physical pain I'm experiencing or something at a given time. But in general, it's not a big change because my life was pretty simple before. But I've noticed the major effect is what I talked about, is that I'm feeling the nuances of it.
And for those who are not living with a chronic illness or life-altering illness, Lynn and I have talked about the fact that in some ways it's able to give us a little peek into what it's like living with that and restructuring into a new normal and adapting to changes that limit our ability to do those kinds of things that you said, just go out and do something. And hopefully gives a little more insight and a little more empathy for those who don't have a chronic illness and for those who do.
Right, that's one of the things. I've always been a compassionate person, but my compassion has deepened immensely. And, when I see somebody walking with a cane or impaired in some way, I feel for that person much more deeply. And I also see the person inside that physical form. So much of the time we judge people and define them by their physical actions. And unconsciously, I didn't realize that I was discounting them in a way as a human being. But this experience has shown me that what I really am is what's inside this form looking out. And that's the humanity of that. So, and I've also seen that everybody has something in their life that impairs them in some way, whether it's physical, emotional, psychological, financial, could be anything, but we're all in this human boat together.
You know, I love that. Tony, one of the things I was thinking is that your particular chronic illness, from what you were just saying, is sometimes you must look like everybody else on the street who doesn't have a chronic illness who's walking around. And sometimes later in the day when the medication has worn off some, you might look a bit more disabled. Do you find people responding differently to you from one phase to another of how you're doing?
Yes. People are frightened by people who aren't functioning normally. And it's a very strange experience because I'm the same person, but I see them reacting to what their belief is of what a healthy person is. And there's something about having an impairment that in our culture we make shameful. I mean, and when I was first diagnosed, that's one of the things I went through. I had a kind of shame about it, like I'd made some mistake, like somehow it was my fault. What did I do wrong? And I've learned that that's ridiculous. And yeah, when we live in an area and in a culture where most people are pretty healthy and fitting the description, the belief of what a decent, good person is, then when somebody is out of that norm in some way, it scares people.
Yes, it does.
So, do you have any last thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Well, I think the main thing for me is learning to appreciate what is happening right now in the moment, in the day, and to have some loving kindness toward myself and toward others in responding to that, and to treat myself with gentleness and understanding, and to accept my humanity.
It's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it was great speaking with both of you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.